Would you risk your sanity just to find out what lies beyond that rusted gate? When Evan Fletcher returned to the quiet Appalachian town of Deep Hollow, he thought he was escaping his past, but the past was waiting with teeth. Strange symbols carved into stone, whispers through the pine trees, and a ritual no one remembers starting. As Evan peels back the layers of a decades-old curse, he'll learn that some doors, once opened, demand blood to close. This isn't just a ghost story, it's a warning. Try Googling Faton, West Virginia. You won't find a damn thing. Not anymore. It started as a joke, some kind of weird glitch in the search engine, maybe a temporary DNS error. But after the third time refreshing and the fourth search variation, I realized I wasn't hallucinating. My hometown, the place I had lived my entire life, Faton, was gone. Not just gone in the way ghost towns fade from memory. Gone, like it had never existed. No results, no articles, no images, no alumni pages, no school yearbooks, not even a goddamn Yelp review for Rosie's Diner, where I used to get blueberry pancakes every Sunday morning. I typed Faton City High School, blank. Faton Public Library, nothing. Faton City zip code, no matches. It was as if someone had blacked it out from every server on Earth. But that wasn't the worst part. None of my friends were online. Not on Facebook, not on Discord, not even old messages in the chat logs. It was like their usernames had been wiped too. At first, I thought I'd been hacked. Then I thought maybe I was dreaming. Then I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. The town was still there. Sort of. Rain clung to the glass like sweat on skin, and the thick Appalachian fog made the tree line blur into a single gray mass. Everything was soaked. Still. Silent. My breath misted against the pane as I leaned closer, trying to hear something, anything. That's when Mark, my older brother, burst into my room, barefoot and pale. "Did you hear it?" he asked, his voice sharp, low. "Hear what?" I mumbled. He grabbed my arm and pulled me down the hallway, toward the back window near the staircase. He pointed into the woods behind the gentry's old place. "There, just past the fire pit," he said. "Watch." I squinted through the mist. The trees swayed gently, but I couldn't see anything. My breath caught, then it moved. Something massive surged between the trunks, snapping branches like dry twigs. It wasn't shaped like a bear or a person or any damn thing I'd seen before. It was hunched, dragging something, maybe a limb. No, a tree, behind it. And then it was gone. A scream rang out in the distance, across the neighboring yard. Dad came storming up the hallway in his flannel and socks, clutching the shotgun he kept in the bedroom closet. "Both of you, away from the damn window!" We obeyed. I don't know what scared me more, whatever was in the woods or the look in his eyes. By morning, the power was out. The whole block, maybe the whole town. In Faton, that wasn't unusual. Outages happened at least twice a month, especially during late October when storms tore through the valley. Normally, Dad would grumble about the electric company and kick the generator into gear. This time, though, he didn't say a word. He was pacing, checking the windows, again and again, every 5 minutes like clockwork. Mom cooked breakfast on the camp stove in the kitchen. No complaints, no conversation, just mechanical calm. She made bacon and scrambled eggs like it was a Saturday picnic, even though the air smelled like wet dirt and ozone. She kept the board games on the table. Monopoly? Clue. She smiled too much, and her eyes were too wide. "We can play after breakfast," she said, setting plates down. "Make a little normal out of the weird, right?" Mark didn't answer. Neither did I. Instead, I asked, "What was that thing last night?" Mom's hands paused mid-wipe. She looked at me, just looked. Her face was neutral, but her eyes were screaming. Before she could answer, Dad spoke from the living room. "Doesn't matter what it was," he said. "No one is going outside, you hear me? No one." Mark rolled his eyes and stood. "I'm going for a walk before lunch." "You're not," Mom snapped. There could be downed wires. There could be more than that. I caught it. "What else, Mom?" I asked. "What aren't you telling us?" She just looked at me again, lips pressed together. For a second, I thought she might break. Then Dad slammed his phone down on the end table. "Nothing. No one's telling you anything, because you don't need to know." That was when I realized they were hiding something. Around 10 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. I almost cried with relief. Maybe it was a lineman from the county utility. Maybe it was Officer Garrison doing wellness checks. Hell, maybe it was the Gentrys. I ran toward the door, but Dad cut me off like a linebacker, arms out, eyes wild. "Don't answer it," he hissed. "Don't make a sound." "What?" I whispered, confused. "Why not?" He didn't answer. He just backed up against the door, his hand sliding into his jeans pocket where I knew he kept the buck knife. The knock came again, this time slower, measured, polite, then silence, then scratching, then more knocking, heavier. The walls shook. I felt it in my teeth. "Caleb, sit down. Now," Dad ordered. I did, but Mark didn't. He crept to the kitchen, peeked through the curtain, and gasped. "What?" I hissed. His voice came out shaky. "It's standing on the porch. It has no face." I couldn't breathe. Dad unzipped the duffel bag he'd kept packed for years, but never explained. Inside, more ammo, a revolver, flares. My throat went dry. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the knocking stopped. Complete silence fell across the house. Mom curled into the couch and shut her eyes. Dad stood sentinel, his knuckles white around the grip of the shotgun. Mark didn't sleep. Neither did I. And somewhere in that silence, I felt something burrow its way under my skin. Not fear, recognition. Like something old and forgotten was finally waking up. I spent the next morning staring at the ceiling, not sleeping, not blinking much either. Mark had taken post by the bedroom window, curled up in his hoodie, watching the tree line like it was going to blink back at him. Dad hadn't moved from the front door since the knocking stopped. He just sat there, shotgun across his lap, eyes glassy. Mom made oatmeal. She didn't eat it. None of us did. At some point, the internet signal came flickering back. Weak but usable. I grabbed my laptop and tried everything again. Phaton, West Virginia. Phaton population. Phaton City Council. Phaton zip code. Phaton zip code. Missing towns in Appalachia. Government cover-up of entire town. Nothing. Just blank pages and redirects. The search engine always defaulted to "Did you mean Fenton or Fulton or some other actual place?" I checked maps, social media, old emails. It was all gone. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour, then opened a blank document and typed, "My name is Caleb Henderson. I live, or used to live, in Phaton, West Virginia, and if you're reading this, that means something went very, very wrong." The power flickered again, and I slammed the laptop shut. By late afternoon, the fog had thickened. Not like regular fog, not the kind that rolls in from the mountains with a soft breath. This fog was dense, too still, too silent. Even the air felt thicker. Mark came over to me with a wild look in his eyes. "We need to do something," he said, voice low. "This isn't just some storm or blackout. Something's happening to this town." "You think I don't know that?" I snapped. "Have you seen Mom? Have you seen Dad? It's like they're not even—" "I know," he cut me off. "That's why we need to leave." I hesitated. "They won't let us." "Then we don't ask." That was the plan. Or at least, it was supposed to be. At dinner, Mom laid out canned stew like it was Thanksgiving. She asked about our schoolwork, upcoming football games, if we'd seen that funny video she forwarded us last week. She didn't mention the thing that knocked last night, or the disappearing town, or the eye in the woods. Dad sat at the end of the table, silent, his hand still resting on the stock of the shotgun, even while holding a spoon. It felt like sitting in a wax museum. Mark nudged my foot under the table. He had packed a small bag, some granola bars, a flashlight, and a utility knife. I nodded back, heart pounding. As soon as the dishes were cleared, we slipped away, quiet, precise. But just as we reached the back door, Dad's voice came low and sharp. "Where do you think you're going?" We froze. Mark turned slowly, just to check the generator. Dad looked up. Something cold passed behind his eyes. "You check it from inside now." His hand curled tighter around the shotgun. We backed off. That night, around 3 a.m., the scratching returned. This time it came from the back window, then the kitchen door, then the crawl space vents. It was like something was circling us, tapping, testing every seam, every crack. We sat huddled in the hallway, Mom clutching a Bible, Dad aiming the gun at the front entrance. Mark held the crowbar we kept under his bed. I just held my breath. The scratching stopped. Then a soft sound floated through the living room window. A voice, feminine, calm, familiar. "Jeannie? Jeannie, let me in." Mom gasped, hand flying to her mouth. She dropped the Bible. "No," Dad hissed. "No, no, no." Mark and I exchanged a look. "Who's Jeannie?" I whispered. But before anyone could answer, the front door rattled again. Knock. 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 Not harsh, not loud, but deliberate. Mark peeked through the peephole and recoiled. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't speak. He just backed away, fast. Dad rose, aimed the gun. Silence. Then, a melody. It came soft at first, like a lullaby. It hummed through the floorboards, through the vents, through the walls, as if the entire house had started to breathe in harmony with the thing outside. Mom fell to her knees and started rocking. "They're here," she whispered. "They've come to collect." "Shut up," Dad shouted, his voice cracking. "It's not real. It's not real." But I saw his eyes. He believed. Somewhere around 5 a.m., the melody stopped. The house fell into eerie stillness again. Mark opened the window shade just enough to peek out. The fog was receding. But in its place was something worse. He turned to me and said, "You need to see this." We crept to the window together. I pressed my face to the glass and looked out at the old Simmons house across the street, and I saw it. Tall, thin, its legs bowed at unnatural angles, its arms too long, like branches warped in fire. It had no face, only a smooth expanse of skin, glossy and black, like wet vinyl. But worse than that was what it held. A body. No, a person. Alive. Smiling. It was Mrs. Gentry. She reached out toward the thing like it was a long-lost lover. It lifted her gently and began walking down the street. Its legs folding like insect joint. The wind swirled behind it, and then it turned to look at us. Not with eyes, but with awareness, like it knew exactly where we were. We ducked, heart pounding, throat dry. Mark whispered, "It saw us." And I whispered back, "It remembers our scent." There was an eye in the window last night, and it wasn't human. I didn't sleep. Not after what we saw, not after it saw us. At some point after dawn, Mark passed out with his back against the wall, and the crowbar still gripped in his lap. Dad remained in the living room, unmoving. Mom sat at the edge of the couch, staring into the floor with her hands wrapped around a cold coffee mug she hadn't sipped once. I waited until the first real light of morning broke through the clouds, painting the fog in dull amber. I stood and walked toward the kitchen window, careful not to make a sound. My breath fogged the glass as I stared across the yard. There was nothing out there, but I didn't feel relief. I felt watched, like something was hovering just beyond the tree line, blinking in sync with my heartbeat. A few hours later, the scratching started again, not at the windows this time, from the attic. It began with a soft shuffling like paper being dragged across floorboards, then slow, deliberate steps. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or squirrel, until I heard the tap, 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 steady and intelligent, above my bedroom. Mark was already standing by the time I reached the hallway. He didn't say anything, just nodded at the ceiling. Dad ignored us. He sat on the couch watching the dead television screen, his shotgun leaning against his leg. I crept up the attic ladder with Mark behind me, heart pounding in my throat. The closer I got to the top, the more the sound receded, as if it were descending through the roof rather than moving inside it. I hesitated. Mark touched my shoulder. "Don't open it," he whispered. I didn't. We climbed back down. It was around noon when someone knocked on the back door, a quick, urgent knock. 3 raps, then silence. Dad flinched, stood, cocked the shotgun. "It's me," a voice called through the wood. "Hal, don't shoot." Dad opened the door just a crack. Chuhal stood outside, soaked in sweat, dragging his daughter Alice behind him. She looked pale, lips cracked, hair matted with sweat. One leg was wrapped in an old shirt soaked through with dark red. "We need help," he said. Mom ran for the first aid kit. Dad let them in reluctantly, always eyeing the tree line behind them. Hal collapsed onto the couch. Alice eased onto the floor, trying not to scream. "We were lucky," Hal said. "It was already inside when we noticed." "What?" Mark asked. "The thing, the one from the woods. I must have left the damn window unlocked. It was in our basement when Jeannie—" He stopped short. His eyes glistened. "She's still in there," he said hoarsely. "I couldn't get her out." While Mom bandaged Alice's leg, I knelt beside her. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't answer. I tried again. Do you remember what it looked like?" She blinked slowly, then nodded. "It had too many joints," she whispered. "Its arms bent in wrong places, and its face—" Her voice caught. "It didn't have one, not really. Just skin, shiny, like wet marble. But it looked at me." She began to cry, soft and silent. I reached out, unsure if I should comfort her. She grabbed my wrist tightly. "I think it remembers me," she said. Later, while Dad and Alice rested, Mark and I retreated to the bedroom. He pulled down the blinds and whispered like we were prisoners in a war zone. "There was something else," he said, before Hal showed up. "What do you mean?" "I saw it. Outside, in the backyard." "Again?" He nodded, but this time, he added, "I don't think it was the same one." I felt my chest tighten. "You mean there's more than one?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked to the window and slowly raised the blind an inch. "I'm not crazy," he said, "but I think one of them left something." We stared out into the yard. Just beyond the garden bed, nestled between the 2 broken lawn chairs, was a dark shape, maybe a foot long. Too far to make out details. "We check it at night," Mark whispered, "when they don't move." "Who says they don't move at night?" He looked at me, dead serious. "They're watching during the day," he said. "At night, they hunt." The rest of the day passed in a haze. We played Monopoly again. Mom smiled too much. Alice wouldn't stop drinking from the canteen he brought. Alice slept, face twitching in dreams. Dad paced. The fog never lifted, the sky never cleared, and in the silence between words, between breaths, I could feel it, the humming tension of something pressing in from all sides. I checked my phone again. Still no signal, no messages, no notifications. It was like we'd fallen off the planet. That evening, Alice woke with a start. She clutched her bandaged leg, sweat pouring down her temples. "My mom," she gasped. She called me." I stood. "What?" "She called me," Alice said again. I heard her voice clear as day. She said, "Come back. I'm waiting." Hal rushed to her side. "Alice, baby, it's okay. You're just scared." "No." Her eyes were wide and full of panic. "It wasn't a dream. I heard her, like she was just outside the window." Mark and I exchanged a look. "You think it's real?" I whispered. He didn't respond. Around midnight, when the others finally slept, Mark and I crept back to the window. The dark object was still there. He opened the back door slowly. We stepped out onto the porch, each footfall echoing louder than it should have in the fog. When we reached the lawn chairs, Mark bent down and picked it up. It was a stone, perfectly round, flat, blacker than tar, cold to the touch. Carved into its surface was a single jagged symbol, a spiral enclosed by a ring of thorns. Neither of us spoke. We turned to go back inside, and that's when we saw it. A single, massive eye floating above the treetops. Open, unblinking, watching us. The tension in the car was suffocating. Caleb drove in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, while I stared at the map again, tracing the edge of Phaeton's circle with my finger. A silence fell over us, punctuated only by the occasional groan of the old road under the tires and the whisper of wind through the broken window seal. The map still felt wrong, not just incorrect, but forbidden. "I don't remember this bridge," Caleb muttered. I glanced up. The bridge ahead was rusted steel, long and low over a narrow gorge. No signs, no lights, just a crooked frame that looked ready to collapse under its own weight. "It's not on the GPS," he added. "Should we keep going?" I said, though I regretted it the moment the words left my mouth. As we crossed, something flickered in the corner of my eye. A figure standing motionless at the edge of the bridge, just outside the reach of our headlights. It wasn't there when I turned to look, just shadows and fog. But my skin prickled with the certainty that something had watched us pass. After another 20 minutes, we reached a clearing. And there it was, the town. Except it wasn't a town. It was Phaeton. The street signs were there, though aged beyond recognition. The names matched what I remembered from childhood: Rose Avenue, Harvest Lane, and the narrow alley called Owl's Hollow. Buildings stood half swallowed by creeping vines and mildew, the paint peeled like dead skin. Streetlights leamed like drunks, but the layout, the air, even the smell, it was Phaeton. "Impossible," Caleb whispered, pulling to a stop. The town that had been wiped from existence, digitally, legally, historically, was here, physically, painfully intact. We stepped out, the air suddenly too still. Caleb pulled his hoodie up. I just stared, unable to breathe. This place shouldn't be here. A hum rang in my ears, low, vibrating through my bones, almost like breathing. I took out the map again. The paper had changed, slightly. There were new markings, a black X that hadn't been there before, near the old elementary school. Scribbled beside it, "They never leave the gym." "Caleb," I said, voice shaking, "we need to go there." The school was worse than I remembered. Windows shattered, graffiti clawed across the walls. But something else lingered, an odor like rust and wet concrete. Caleb kicked open a side door, and we entered the dark hallway, our footsteps echoing too loud. Then we heard it, a rhythmic thumping, soft at first, like footsteps in the distance. But it didn't move away, it moved closer. We reached the gymnasium doors, slightly ajar. I pushed one open slowly, flashlight flickering as it caught rows of broken bleachers and a dozen mannequins standing on the court. No, not mannequins, bodies, still, facing the same direction, heads tilted in unison. Their faces were wrong, smooth, featureless. One had no mouth, another had eyes etched like ink, another had a jaw unhinged too far down, as if it were trying to scream but forgot how. "They never leave the gym," I whispered. "They're stuck." Caleb stumbled back. "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't see this." My flashlight flickered again, and for the briefest moment, I thought one of them moved. Then something else hit me. They were all facing us. We bolted. Out the gym, into the halls, back to the car. Caleb fumbled with the keys, muttering something I couldn't hear. "They looked at us, Caleb," I said, breathless. "They watched. I know." No, I mean, they weren't like that when we walked in. Their heads moved, they're aware. He slammed the door shut. We're leaving, now. The car roared back to life, tires kicking gravel as we peeled away from the school. But something in me knew we hadn't escaped. Not really. The map lay on the dashboard now, and I swore it had changed again. The ink shifted. The X had moved. To our location. They know we're here, I said. Caleb didn't answer. His face had gone pale. Look, he finally whispered, pointing. Ahead, at the edge of town, someone stood in the road. A tall, thin figure draped in what looked like funeral garb. A long black coat, gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over its face. It didn't move. Didn't flinch. Caleb honked. Nothing. Then, it lifted its head. There was no face, only skin. Pale, smooth skin stretched tight over where its eyes, mouth, and nose should be. Then it started walking toward us. We reversed. Fast. But when we turned the corner to escape the way we came, the road was gone. Where there had been asphalt and trees, there was nothing. Just endless, blank, gray mist swallowing the horizon. No landmarks, no direction. Fatten had closed behind us. And the map? The map was burning. The house stood at the edge of Phaeton like a scar, not abandoned but waiting. Even before we stepped out of the car, I could feel it. That house wasn't just old, it was aware. The shingles curled like dry lips. The windows, smeared with soot and grime, looked less like glass and more like eyes. Watching, judging, daring us. I know that place, I said, barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't respond. He stared at the house, as if something inside it had already spoken to him. It was the Rose family home. A place buried somewhere in my childhood memories, beneath years of dust and forgotten newspaper clippings. Daniel Rose, the name came rushing back like bile. The boy who vanished. The last person anyone remembered living in Phaeton before the town was erased. But I remembered more than that. I remembered the backyard. A swing that creaked even when there was no wind. A cellar door that was always locked. Except the night Daniel disappeared, and a red mark painted on the porch. We approached slowly, the gravel under our feet crunching far too loud in the silence. The town itself had faded into background haze, like a dream slipping from memory. Only the house remained in sharp clarity, as if it were the center of everything. The front door was ajar. Should we? Caleb asked. I nodded. We have to. Something's pulling us toward it. Inside, the air was thick, not with dust or rot, but with intent, as if the house had been expecting us. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, revealing symbols underneath, not drawings, not paint, carvings, old and jagged, symbols I recognized from the map, from the gym, from the faces of those mannequin-like corpses. The house knew the ritual. We stepped into the living room. The furniture remained not decayed, not broken, but positioned too precisely, like a stage set. On the mantel was a cracked photo frame. I picked it up. Daniel. 9 years old, dark hair, one front tooth missing, standing in front of this very fireplace. His smile was blurred, like the image was fading away. And then the air shifted. A whisper, just above hearing. A child's voice, but hoarse, breathy, like it came through layers of fabric. Simon. I froze. Did you hear that? I asked Caleb. He shook his head. What? But I knew. I hadn't told him my name since we got here. That voice wasn't his. It was the house, calling me by name. We pushed deeper in. Down the hallway, each step echoed unnaturally, like we were walking on hollow bones. The doors on either side were all closed, except for one, the basement door. It yawned open. Stairs descending into a pitch blackness so absolute it seemed to drink the light. Absolutely not, Caleb muttered. We're not going down there, but my feet moved anyway. As if remembering a path they had taken before, I reached the bottom of the stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the concrete floor was wet, not with water, but something thicker. The air smelled metallic, old. Caleb joined me, his flashlight flickering. Then we saw it. Carved into the far wall was a massive symbol, the same one from the burned map. A circle of thorns with jagged teeth radiating from the center. In the middle, a child's handprint, still red. There were markings around it, not English, not Latin, but glyphs that twisted when you stared too long. I felt dizzy. Caleb touched the wall and instantly recoiled, hissing in pain. What the hell? His fingers had blistered. The house didn't want us to break the seal. Then, without warning, the flashlight died, total darkness, and in that suffocating black, the whisper returned. Closer, louder. Simon, you came back. Not a memory, not my imagination. A voice. Daniel's voice. Something moved behind me. The sound of small feet on concrete. I turned, heart pounding, but there was nothing. Just the shape of the wall, the flicker of light? No, a glow, red and pulsing. From beneath the floorboards, we scrambled back upstairs, slamming the basement door shut behind us. My skin felt electric. Like static before a lightning strike. Caleb looked at me, breathing hard. What the hell was that? I think Daniel never left, I said. I think he's trapped or part of something. He stared. You think the house did it? I shook my head. Not the house, something inside it. As we exited through the backyard opened before us. The swing moved slightly. No wind. But it wasn't the swing that stopped us cold. It was the circle. In the grass, burned into the soil, was the same symbol as in the basement. Around it, 6 black candles. Burnt down, wax melted into the earth. At the center, a pile of old faded clothes. A child's shirt, jeans, shoes, and above them, tied to the tree branch, a noose. Small, for a boy. Ah, your dad was part of this? I nodded slowly, staring down at the final line, written in trembling ink. There must be 6 offerings, 1 for each point of the circle, and the 7th is the gate. I looked up, heart sinking. What if Daniel was just the first? Just then, a distant sound pierced the silence. Not a chant, not a whisper. A bell, faint and metallic, like it was swinging from a broken tower. Caleb turned toward the sound. Is that a church? No, I said, voice dry. Then what? I didn't answer because I remembered something from an old town ledger, from a story I'd overheard as a kid but never fully understood. Fatan had no church, but it did have a bell tower, a watchtower, built centuries ago to warn the living when the gate opened. As the bell tolled again, louder this time, I felt a sudden warmth on my arm. I looked down. The scar I had since childhood, one I never could explain, was glowing red. And in my head, Daniel's voice returned. 5 more, and we can come through. The bell tolled again, closer this time. But there was no wind, no ropes, no tower in sight. Only the sound and the knowing. We didn't sleep that night. Kaylin and I holed up in what used to be a motel office. The front desk collapsed under ivy, and the lobby smelled like wet plaster and old smoke. Still, it had 4 walls and no windows, and that was more than most buildings in Phaeton now. I stayed up reading my father's journal, page over and over again. The words burned behind my eyes. 6 offerings, 1 gate. If you hear the bell, it's begun. Caleb had fallen asleep sitting up, arms crossed, but I could tell by the twitching of his fingers that even in sleep, he wasn't at peace. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the bell rang for a 3rd time. This time, I felt it in my spine. Not just a sound, A pull. A summons. Morning came, or at least what passed for morning in this place. The sky was a jaundiced gray, the sun hidden behind a wall of rotting clouds. We emerged from the motel to find the town even quieter than before. No birds, no insects, no wind, and in the distance, past the old courthouse, beyond the skeletal tree line, stood a structure that shouldn't have been there. The watchtower. It wasn't on any map, not even the hand-drawn one in my father's envelope, but there it was, rising like a broken tooth from the forest's edge, stone blackened with age, its roof collapsed, but the bell still swaying, without a rope. "We shouldn't go there," Caleb said, eyeing it through his camera lens. "Places like that, they're built to keep things in." "Or warn others," I said, already walking. The path was overgrown, the gravel half swallowed by roots. As we got closer, I noticed symbols etched into the trees, same as the ones in Daniel's backyard. Runes made from curves and slashes, almost like music or command. The closer we got, the more the air changed, colder, thicker, and beneath our feet the soil turned soft, spongy, as if it had absorbed blood long ago and never dried. Inside the tower, the walls were lined with carvings, hundreds of them, showing figures with no faces, kneeling before a massive shadow with horns and dozens of eyes. At the center of the floor, a trapdoor made of iron rusted shut. Caleb knelt beside it, brushing away dust and leaves. "This isn't part of the original design, it's newer." "How do you know?" "I grew up around churches. Old towers were meant to be lookouts. This thing was sealed for a reason." I nodded. "And someone tried to bury it, carve it up." That's when I noticed the names carved along the base of the trapdoor. One of them, second from the left, was Raymond Fletcher, my father. I knelt beside it, fingers trembling as I traced the letters. Caleb stepped back, whispering, "Your dad sealed this, or helped build it?" "Why would he do that?" I didn't answer, because deep down I already knew. This wasn't just a warning tower. It was a prison, and something inside was waking up. We circled the room. I found what looked like an old logbook, water damaged and moldy, but still intact. The entries were dated between 1972 and 1994. Most of them were short. Bell rang at 3:13, not 1. No activity, wind from the west, circle intact, on offering rejected. No blood drawn. But one stood out. It was written in different ink, hastily scratched across the margin. Simon's birth triggered the mark. He must never return to Phaeton. My breath caught. Caleb looked over my shoulder. "That's your name." I nodded. It wasn't just a coincidence. My father didn't leave Phaeton because he was tired of this town. He ran. From me. Just then, a metallic groan echoed through the tower. The trapdoor shifted. Only a little, but enough. Something was pushing from below. Caleb raised his camera. It flickered again, freezing on a warped image. Not of us, but of a room. Concrete walls, a sigil on the floor, and a boy. Daniel, smiling, bleeding from the eyes, holding up 6 fingers, and behind him, a shadow with horns and a mouth that stretched from wall to wall. The image vanished. Caleb dropped the camera. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, I whispered, "He's counting the offerings." Caleb turned to me. "If Daniel was first, and we're here now..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because we both knew. The ritual was still collecting. There was no mistaking it now. The tower was awake. As the trapdoor groaned again, louder this time, the entire stone floor beneath us trembled, dust pouring down from the broken rafters above. Caleb backed up toward the wall, hand instinctively gripping the rusted handle of a crowbar he'd found on our way here. His knuckles were white. "We need to go now." But I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the trapdoor, on the faint red glow leaking through the seams, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat, and then a crack. Not in the trapdoor, In me. Right above my collarbone, I felt a burning. I stumbled back and yanked down my shirt, revealing a mark I'd never seen before. A scar, circular, ringed with 6 jagged lines pointing inward, like the spokes of a ritual symbol. The same shape we'd seen etched into the trees. Into Daniel's room, onto the bell in the watchtower. Caleb stared at it in horror. That wasn't there yesterday. I know. It looks like... I know, Caleb. I pressed my fingers to it and felt something wriggle underneath, like it wasn't a scar, like it was alive. We fled the tower, but the woods had changed. The trees were closer, the branches lower, clawing at us like fingers. And though we ran for 20 minutes, the town never appeared. The sky darkened too fast, as if time itself was broken. Or worse, looping. Caleb finally collapsed near a creek that hadn't been on our map. He was out of breath, lips pale, eyes distant. Something's wrong with me. He turned his camera toward himself, and his reflection in the lens didn't match his movements. The image blinked 1 second late, like a puppet being controlled. I think I'm being copied, he said softly, and that's when I remembered what Daniel had said in the video. They wear your face first. I made Caleb drink water, forced him to focus on a nursery rhyme he remembered from childhood, a trick my father had taught me for keeping the mind anchored during psychic disturbances. But in the back of my head I felt it too, something watching, counting. As we stumbled back toward the heart of town, we passed by the old church. The doors were wide open now, though we had seen them boarded shut earlier that day. Inside, the pews were all turned to face backwards toward the entrance, and along the aisle from altar to exit were 6 mannequins, dressed in black robes. No faces, no hands. But on the wall behind them, daubed in a thick tar-like substance, was a phrase. 5 have passed, 1 remains. I stared at it, my chest tight. If Daniel was the first, if others had been taken, replaced, and if the mark meant I was chosen, then who was the 6th? That night, we made camp in what used to be the fire station. We found old rations, dusty first aid kits, a working lantern. Caleb fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't. The mark on my neck itched, and my mind kept drifting back to my father. Why had he built that trap door? Why had he written, "Simon must never return"? Was it me that drew the darkness back? Or was it already in me? I took the journal page from my bag, holding it under the flickering light. There was more writing, tiny faded in the bottom margin. The mark is a beacon, not a curse. They come to those born near the gate. They cannot touch those who do not carry blood from the soil. Blood from the soil, Phaeton blood. I looked at my hands. My fingertips were dark with dried mud and cuts from climbing into the tower. But maybe it wasn't the cuts that mattered. Maybe it was my birthright, the bloodline. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I woke up with a gasp. The bell was inside my ears this time. And outside, I saw something moving down Main Street, slowly, deliberately, casting no shadow. A figure in black. Its face was my own, but bleeding from the eyes, mouthing something I couldn't hear. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned to wake Caleb, but he was already gone, his sleeping bag still warm, his camera gone. And on the wall, scratched in the red chalk we'd found in the tower, were 3 words. I found 6. As Simon staggers out into the darkness, following what may no longer be Caleb, the camera in his pocket begins to record on its own, capturing footage of a room he's never seen, and in the corner, a flickering image of himself chained to a wall, begging not to be let out. I saw Caleb again that morning. He was waving at me from across the street. But his mouth was gone. The sun never rose properly in Phaeton. It bled into the sky like a wound that never healed, leaving everything under a pallid orange haze. The town, once muted with decay, now vibrated faintly under my skin, like something was humming beneath the concrete. a frequency I couldn't hear, but couldn't ignore either. I stood in the middle of Maple Street, watching Caleb from a distance. He stood where the library used to be, across from the shuttered post office, arm raised in a slow, mechanical wave. But his face was wrong. Where his mouth should have been, there was only skin, smooth, blank, as if the idea of speech had been cut from him entirely. I didn't wave back. Instead, I backed away, slowly, toward the church bell that no longer rang, toward the courthouse with its sunken steps. I knew what this was. An echo, not a ghost, not a person, but a shadow left behind when the real Caleb had been taken. The thing across the street dropped its hand and tilted its head, almost inquisitively, and then, without moving its legs, it slid backward into the fog. Gone. I ducked into a former antique store, what remained of Holloway's oddities and antiques, and locked the door behind me. The air smelled like mothballs and smoke. Broken clocks littered the floor. Dozens of pocket watches, all pointing to 3:13, were nailed to the walls. But what caught my eye was the mirror. It hung above a cracked mantelpiece, framed in rusted brass, and in it, I saw two of me, one standing, one seated behind me. I spun, heart pounding. Nothing. I turned back to the mirror, still there. The seated version of me had darker eyes. His skin was gray, damp like moss, and he was writing something on his own chest, carving it actually, with a jagged shard of glass. A word. Offering. I stumbled away, knocking over a case full of ceramic dolls. Somewhere in the building, a radio crackled to life, not with music, with a voice. "Simon, you should not have returned." It was my father's voice. We had buried him 7 years ago. You opened the wound. They remember you now. They remember the promise. The radio whined, then cut out. Silence. Back outside, the air was heavier, denser, like the whole town was filling with water, and I was the last dry thing left. I made my way to the old elementary school, hoping to find shelter, or a clue. My memories of this place were fragmented. Blurry art projects, long hallways, the sound of a bell I hadn't heard since I was 12. But as I entered the main foyer, I saw something new. Photos, hung in a perfect grid along the wall, all encased in dusty glass. Each was labeled Student of the Month, all dated from September 1983, the year I left Vitan. Every photo was of me, not different kids. Me. 16 copies, each with a different name. Andrew, Marcus, Caroline, Jonah, Madeline, Alias, each with the same eyes, mine. In the center of the hallway, under a single swaying light, sat a rusted projector. It flickered to life as I approached, showing a grainy black and white film. The sound was warped, the image is jerking like an old newsreel. In the footage, my father, standing in front of the town council. He looked younger, nervous. "If we don't make the exchange," he said, "they'll come through the gate again. We only barely sealed it last time." "And the boy?" another voice asked. "The boy is the key," my father replied. "But he can't know, not yet." I reached for the projector, hand shaking. When the film burned out in a hiss of flame and smoke, the room plunged into darkness. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. My legs moved of their own accord, driven by instinct and terror. I passed burned buildings, hollow houses, mannequins propped up in rocking chairs, faces turned toward the rising mist. The mark on my chest burned now, not like heat, but like pulling, like it wanted me somewhere, like it knew the path better than I did. And all roads led back to the tower. When I reached the edge of the forest clearing, I fell to my knees because the watchtower was gone. In its place was a hole, a perfect black crater in the earth, 30 feet wide, its edges too smooth, too exact to be natural. At the center, far below, I saw something pulse. Red, alive, waiting. My fingers dug into the frozen soil as I crawled toward the rim of the crater. The pulsing red glow at its center beat like a second heart, sinking with the burning brand beneath my collarbone. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But something below called to me. It wasn't just the gate. It was the thing behind it. I slid down the incline, loose gravel cutting into my palms. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became, like the sound had been drained out of the air. All I could hear was my own breath and that awful pulse. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't human. It was alive. At the base of the crater, I found a door. Not a real door, not made of wood or metal, but a jagged arch of stone, slick with black moss and carved with symbols I didn't understand. My body shivered as I looked at them, not from cold, from recognition. These were the same symbols I used to draw as a kid when I couldn't sleep, when I'd wake up screaming at 3:13 a.m. with blood dripping from my nose and a voice whispering numbers in the dark. I thought it was trauma, a byproduct of grief. But no, I'd been taught, or maybe programmed. I stepped through the gate. Immediately the world changed. There was no sky, no ground, just endless corridors of stone, slick and breathing, like I was inside something that used to be alive and still remembered pain. The walls shifted as I passed, widening and closing, like lungs inhaling me. Ahead, torches lit themselves, one by one, in perfect rhythm. On the walls, I saw shadows walking with me, not mine, not even human. Tall, thin, crowned with horns. In the final chamber, I found the others. Not just people, but those who had been taken. Dozens of them, suspended in stone alcoves along the wall like statues. Their mouths sewn shut, their eyes wide open, unblinking, watching me as I passed. I saw my mother first, then the old librarian, then Caleb, and last, carved into a pedestal of obsidian at the center of the room, a younger version of me, frozen in stone, kneeling, hands outstretched, offering something I couldn't see. From the far end of the chamber it emerged, not fast, not dramatic, just inevitable. A being made of darkness but not shadow. It had weight, mass. It bent the light around it like a black hole, pulling color and shape into itself. Its face was ever shifting, sometimes mine, sometimes Caleb's, sometimes a rotting deer's head. But its voice was steady, and it spoke inside my thoughts. You were made to remember, Simon. That was your gift. That was your curse. The town forgot, but you held the pattern. Now the gate remains open because you willed it. I screamed, "What do you want from me?" It moved closer, not walking, replacing the space between us with itself. The closer it came, the more I remembered. The deal, the ritual, the offering made decades ago to keep the town safe. Me, my father hadn't stopped it. He delivered me. But something had gone wrong. The ritual had fractured. I had survived. And that breach, that crack in the memory of Phaeton, had left a scar across time itself. Now the town was being erased, corrected, looped back to the moment of that failure, unless I finished what was started. The entity raised a hand, 5 fingers tipped with bone and ash, and pressed it against my chest. The pain was total. Not fire, not heat, just the sensation of being rewritten. In my mind, I saw pages turning backward, my childhood unraveling. I saw birthdays replaced with silence, friends vanishing from memory, rooms in my old home sealed shut with wax, and at the center of it all, a choice. I could return, walk back into the gate and forget again, let the world realign, let the people of Phaeton remain shadows. Or I could accept the burden, take the memory, become the warden of the gate, a living seal, a prison, a priest. I looked up. The entity was waiting. It didn't push, didn't rush, it only whispered. The world has always needed a door, Simon. but every door must have its key. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer mine. Gray, translucent, like the other echoes I'd seen, like Caleb, like the girl in the window. I spoke the word carved into my chest, offering, and the world screamed. The gate collapsed behind me in a thunderous pulse of wind and stone. The crater was gone. In its place, the watchtower, rebuilt, taller, blacker, humming like a tuning fork inside my skull. I was standing inside it, at the top, looking down on nothing. Not the town, not the forest, not even sky. Just void, endless, open, waiting. A voice echoed from below, a voice I knew, my brother's. "Simon, are you there?" I turned to the stairwell. Footsteps, coming up. The stairs creaked, not with age, but with purpose. Each footfall was too slow, too deliberate, as if whoever was coming up already knew what they would find at the top. I didn't move, couldn't. The tower around me pulsed, alive with memory. Its walls shimmered between stone and something older. Veins of red-black root pulsing beneath the surface, leaking warmth like breath. And then the voice came again. "Simon, is that you?" It was Eli, my brother, still alive, still looking, still innocent. My first instinct was joy, then panic. If Eli found me here, saw me like this, he wouldn't understand, wouldn't accept it, and worse, he'd be seen. Whatever ruled this place now, the entity I had spoken to, it had let me live because I'd chosen to stay. But Eli, he represented a broken thread, a chance for it all to unravel again. The stairs groaned. Closer. I took a step back from the edge. My body felt weightless, but not in the freeing way, more like I was floating inside a husk. My hands had become thin, etched with glowing symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the tower. I reached up, brushing my jaw. It was no longer bone, no longer skin. It was obsidian, cold, smooth, immobile. I was becoming part of it. When Eli finally appeared at the top of the stairs, I almost screamed, not because of him, but because, for a moment, I saw myself reflected in his eyes, and what I saw wasn't Simon Fletcher. It was the Watcher, black-robed, rooted in shadow, eyes like eclipse moons. "Simon," he breathed. He dropped his flashlight. It shattered at his feet, and yet the chamber remained lit, glowing softly from the runes along the wall, from my skin, from the air itself. "You're alive," he whispered. "I don't think that's the right word," I said. He took a step forward. What happened to you? Where is this place? I followed you into the woods, but then everything changed. There's no sky out there, just dark, like the town never existed." "It didn't," I said. "Not anymore. Not in a way he would understand." I wanted to explain it all. The deal made before we were born, the gate, the false memories, the cost of preserving the illusion, but words felt too heavy, too real. And time was wrong here. It bent, stretched, echoed. Behind Eli, the staircase vanished, not collapsed, vanished, erased. As if time had closed the door behind him. He was stuck now, like me. The tower groaned. Its ceiling cracked open like an eyelid, revealing a sky made of shifting stars, not constellations, but writhing lines like nerves. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating deep inside my ribs. The gate was calling again, not to me, to him. I lunged forward, grabbed Eli's shoulders. "You have to leave." His eyes widened. "There's nowhere to go. The forest. It just loops." I tried to backtrack, and I kept ending up at the school, but it was burned down. "I saw the fire, Simon. I saw you in the window." I shook him, hard. "You weren't supposed to follow. You weren't supposed to remember." "I remembered because I saw your name in the records, because you left me a message." That stopped me cold. "What message?" Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a torn scrap of notebook paper. My handwriting, rushed, jagged, familiar. "If you find this, Go to the tower. I'll be waiting. If you remember, they can't erase you. The gate isn't closed." I staggered back. I didn't write that. Not here, not now. Maybe in another loop, in another version of Phaeton, where I had tried to stop this earlier. The tower began to shake. The runes on the walls glowed brighter. The floor beneath us split, revealing the gate again, its core bubbling like liquid fire, spinning with faces I knew and voices I had forgotten. Caleb, Mom, the librarian, the thing from the mirror, all calling, all hungry. Eli grabbed my arm. "We finish it together." "No," I said. "I finish it. You leave." "But how?" "I make them remember." Before he could answer, the tower split with a deafening crack, and something began to rise from the gate. Something bigger than before. Its limbs unfolded like spider legs made of smoke and sorrow, and its voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was a roar that split the world in half. "You dare defy the cycle?" Eli screamed. The tower walls melted around us. I reached for the altar, the one that once held the obsidian statue of me, now broken. But beneath it, I saw it. The original seal. A knife made of bone. My name carved into the hilt. I grabbed it, turned, faced the thing that had haunted our bloodline for generations. "Let's break the pattern," I said. Then I drove the knife into my own heart. Pain didn't come, only stillness. The moment the blade entered, everything stopped. The roar, the collapse, even the pulse of the gate. It was as if the tower had taken a deep breath and refused to exhale. Then the blood came, but not red, black. Thick as ink, it spilled down my chest, curling around the runes that had etched themselves into my skin since I entered Phaeton's shadow. The obsidian that once encased my arms began to crack, fracture, fall away like burned bark. I was burning from the inside out, and yet I was free. Eli rushed to me, screaming my name. But his voice was muffled now, distant, like someone shouting underwater. I tried to say. The bloodline, the tether, it had to end somewhere. But my voice came out in another tongue, something older, the language of the gate, because now I understood. The thing beneath the town, it hadn't been feeding on people. It had been feeding on memory. The history of Phaeton, the missing faces, the rewritten timelines. It had been devouring context, reshaping the world one forgotten truth at a time, and my family, our bloodline, was its final anchor. The last guardians who remembered the gate's true form. And to end it, one of us had to willingly forget everything, wipe the last slate clean. By offering our own memory, the tower began to disintegrate. The walls peeled away, revealing not the forest, not the sky, but pages, endless pages, flipping backward in an invisible wind. Each was a different version of our story. Eli dying instead of me, Phaeton never built, the gate sealed before birth, loops, drafts, lives lived and erased, but one page remained unwritten, still blank, still waiting. I collapsed. Eli caught me, but when he looked into my face, his own twisted in horror. "Simon, your eyes, what about them?" "They're empty," I smiled. "That's the point." A beam of light sliced down through the collapsing tower. Not fire, not magic, morning. The first true sunrise I had seen since the day I returned to Phaeton. The curse was lifting. I could feel it. But the price was me. The floor cracked one final time, and the gate's core, once swirling molten horror, froze, became still, then shattered like glass, scattering into dust that caught the sunlight like snowflakes. And then, silence. Real silence. Not haunted, not waiting, just quiet. I opened my eyes, or tried to, but all I could see was white. Not blinding, not painful, just blank. A canvas clean. "Simon?" Eli's voice trembled. He knelt beside me, gripping my shoulders, shaking. "I don't know who you are," I whispered. His face crumpled. Tears poured from him. But I didn't feel anything. Not sorrow, not fear, only a vague sense that I had done what was needed. Whatever I had been was gone now. Eli took my hand. Together we walked out of the ruins of the tower, through the forest that now felt smaller, quieter. Faton was gone, or never had been, maybe both. All that remained was a narrow dirt road, stretching into the mist, and one signpost, broken and moss-covered, with a single word carved into the wood: forget. Epilogue 6 weeks later. Somewhere in upstate New York, a young woman walks into the county records office, holding a faded photograph of a town no one seems to recall. Faton, she says. I think it's where my brother went missing. The clerk behind the desk blinks, confused. I've never heard of that place. She nods, unsurprised. Still, she pulls a crumpled notebook from her bag. Inside are sketches of symbols, towers, routes, and a name, scratched over and over. Simon Fletcher. She flips to the last page. It's blank, but at the bottom, written faintly, almost like a whisper, if you find this, don't come back. She looks up, smiles, and walks out into the fog. From behind the counter, the clerk watches her leave, then turns to the filing cabinet. Inside, beneath a false bottom, lies a black notebook, pulsing faintly with warmth. On its cover, the Watcher's mark, and a single flickering page that hadn't been there yesterday. Thank you for listening to this story. Maybe you don't believe a word of it. Maybe you think it's all just some elaborate tale to scare people on the internet. But let me tell you something. There was a town, there was a gate, and there are still things out there that thrive in silence, in forgotten places, in the cracks between memory and reality. If you ever wake up with dirt under your fingernails and no idea how you got home, if you ever find an old road sign with no town listed, if you ever hear your name whispered in a voice that shouldn't exist, walk away. Don't investigate. Don't be like me. Because some stories were never meant to be told, and some names were never meant to be remembered.